In today's hyper-connected world, wireless technology is an integral part of our daily lives. From smartphones to Wi-Fi networks, radio frequency radiation, or RFR, surrounds us constantly. However, mounting scientific evidence suggests that prolonged exposure to RFR may pose significant health risks, especially to our children. Despite this, current safety guidelines remain outdated, and critical research funding has been cut. It's time to take a stand and demand action to safeguard our children's health. Outdated safety guidelines, a danger to public health. The Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, last updated its safety guidelines for RFR exposure in 1996. These guidelines are based solely on thermal effects, the premise that only radiation strong enough to heat human tissue is harmful. However, numerous studies have since demonstrated that non-thermal biological effects can occur at exposure levels well below the current safety limits. National Toxicology Program, or NTP study. This extensive, decade-long study found clear evidence that high levels of RFR exposure led to the development of malignant tumors in the hearts and brains of male rats. The exposure levels were comparable to those experienced by heavy cell phone users. Ramazzini Institute study. Independently replicating the NTP's findings, this Italian research institute observed similar increases in tumors among rodents exposed to RFR at levels equivalent to emissions from cell towers. These studies underscore the urgent need to revise safety guidelines to account for both thermal and non-thermal effects of RFR exposure. Defunding critical cancer research, a step backward. Despite compelling evidence from the NTP and Ramazzini Institute studies, the Biden-Harris administration has halted funding for crucial research into the health effects of wireless radiation. Defunding the world's most important cancer research hampers our ability to understand RFR risks fully and develop appropriate safety standards. This move not only stalls scientific progress but also puts millions of Americans, particularly children, at continued risk. Ignoring legal mandates and scientific evidence. In 2021, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled that the FCC failed to provide a reasoned explanation for maintaining its 1996 safety guidelines, ignoring evidence of non-thermal health risks. The court ordered the FCC to reassess its guidelines in light of the latest scientific research. 3 years later, the FCC has yet to update its guidelines, and the administration has not taken meaningful action to enforce the court's mandate. This inaction neglects the health and safety of the public, especially vulnerable populations like children, who are more susceptible to RFR due to their developing bodies and longer lifetime exposure. Our children's health should come first. Children are not just small adults, their developing brains and bodies are uniquely vulnerable to environmental hazards. Studies have linked RFR exposure to increased cancer risk. Prolonged exposure may elevate the risk of developing certain types of cancers, including brain tumors, neurological effects, potential impacts on cognitive functions, memory, attention, and behavior, reproductive and developmental issues, possible effects on fertility and developmental abnormalities. By failing to update safety standards and restore research funding, we are neglecting our responsibility to protect the next generation. A call to action: demand accountability and change. It's imperative that we hold our leaders accountable and advocate for policies that prioritize public health over corporate interests. Update FCC safety guidelines immediately. Incorporate non-thermal effects. Revise exposure limits to reflect current scientific understanding. Protect vulnerable populations. Implement stricter standards for places like schools and daycare centers. Restore funding for critical research. Reinstate NTP research funding. Enable continued investigation into the long-term health effects of RFR. Support independent studies. Encourage unbiased research free from industry influence. Promote transparency and public engagement. Public hearings and consultations. Involve communities in decision-making processes. Educational initiatives. Increase public awareness about RFR risks and safety practices. Make your voice heard. Our collective action can drive meaningful change. Here's how you can contribute. Contact your representatives. Urge them to prioritize updating safety guidelines and restoring research funding. Stay informed. Keep up with the latest research and share information with your community. Practice precautionary measures. Limit personal RFR exposure by using hands-free devices, reducing screen time for children, and turning off wireless functions when not in use. Conclusion. The well-being of our children and future generations hinges on the actions we take today. The evidence is clear. Current safety standards are insufficient, and neglecting this issue is no longer an option. By demanding updated guidelines and the reinstatement of critical research funding, we can protect our families and ensure a healthier future. Let's come together to end the era of misclassified RFR health risks. Our children deserve nothing less.